Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas, and this is episode 263, and it's a special one because we're going to be looking at the year in review for our New Year's end of the year special. So, quick shout out to Mustapha. He did a great job putting together this episode. And basically, what we did was we went back, reviewed a lot of our past episodes from this year, and decided to highlight and emphasize some certain parts of particular episodes that really resonated with us and we thought you would have the same feelings for. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this. It's a real treat. I'm really a big fan of the parts that we took out because, again, I think they're just really impactful, and I think you'll find that they are for you as well. So here's to the holidays. Here's to a new year. And again, thank you all for being such great listeners of Indie Game Movement.
Hey everybody, and welcome back. As Andrew might have mentioned in the intro, today we're just going to be compiling some clips from some previous episodes. I'll be doing a little bit of a lean into each one just to explain why we chose the clips that we did for this New Year's compilation. To start, I'd like to address our first pick. It's from episode 251, How to Market to Cultural Audiences with Osama Dorias. The piece of advice that we chose is particularly around the dynamic nature of tone. In this instance, he references a cold commercial across two separate cultures, and the way in which this plays not only into cultural sensitivity, but also into marketing, advertisement, localization trends, and so on. A lot of insightful information to be found here, and so gear in. I'll go ahead and play a clip from that episode. Links to individual episodes referenced in this clip show will also be in the show notes.
Wanting to understand like what's real and relatable, right? Because that's really important aspect to what we're talking about here. So like sometimes when game creators are looking to provide, realistic settings or relatable themes even, they can sometimes base this information off what appears to be common understanding, right? But how can assuming this potentially provide an unrealistic view, which can possibly have a negative impact on some cultures?
Yes. Okay. So one thing you have to be careful of is that even though there are a lot of topics that are relatable, a lot of times the approaches around those topics are very differently from region to region. I'll give an example from where I grew up. I grew up in Montreal, Canada, and I grew up watching both English television, which is a mixture of Canadian TV, but mostly it's American TV. We're neighbors up north. We get a lot of your TV shows, but also French TV, which is also a mixture of television from France, but mostly local from Quebec, the province where I'm from. So what I noticed is sometimes the same brand would have two ads, one in English and one in French, and the tone of the ads would be completely different. I noticed it at a young age, completely different based on whether it was French or English. One of the examples that stuck with me to this day is ads, and this was across all brands. Everybody understood this. Ads for cold medicine. In English TV, a cold is treated as a serious thing. People are always like in pain. They have like nasal pain, and you see like there's stark reds that's superimposed on top of the people's nasal passages, and they're holding their heads because of a headache. The tone is very, this is bad and have this medicine. French ads often played funny music. It was lighthearted. It's like, oh, you have a cold. Oh, poor you. Here, take this. It'll make you feel better. That might sound like a small subtle difference, but it was huge. And it's because how you approach a topic within a culture or within a demographic is going to paint it. If for example, you had a similar ad than the French ads, but towards an English audience, I would imagine like, colds are serious. What are you talking about? It's stopping me from work. It's hindering my life. You can't make fun of colds in this kind of setting. I just won't take your product seriously. While in French, it's like, it's just a cold. There are worse things out there. Both are right, and having a cold is a relatable thing. Like everybody in the world has a cold, but just the tone uh, makes a big difference. So if you go in and you say, well, everyone has colds, we're going to make some like an ad and make it universal across everywhere, you're in for, if you don't do the legwork to see how the expectation from the region, you could be in for a rude awakening when people react one way or another towards it. So like I know it's subtle, but that's important. I could give another example, very very different example. This also stuck with me from a long time ago. Symbolisms are very important.
Mm.
This is not exactly an advertising, but it strikes home from someone who used to watch a lot of boxing. From when Muhammad Ali fought George Foreman in Zaire, and you're thinking, where is he going with this? the crowd were chanting Muhammad Ali's name. Like basically he did a few things that are really strong lessons. He understood marketing himself better than Muhammad Ali understood marketing himself so well, more than many people do today. He actually visited Zaire early. He landed there early. He spent time with the people to get to know them, to understand their likes and dislikes. And he did one thing, is he represented himself as one of them, and that Foreman is this invading force. They're both American. Muhammad Ali and George Foreman are both American. They're both black. If anything, George Foreman's skin complexion looked closer to the people of Zaire than Muhammad Ali's. Muhammad Ali's is more fair-skinned. They should have had more superficially more reason to root for George Foreman because they were just recently colonized by Belgium not too long ago. But Muhammad Ali presented Foreman just by being there early and speaking to them, seeing that how they reacted to like they still had strong feelings, understandably, for their colonizers. He represented George Foreman as someone who's from the colonizing force, and himself as one of them. And the other thing that George Foreman inadvertently did, which he didn't realize, he walked out of the plane with 2 German shepherds. And German shepherds in Zaire were used by the colonizing force to control the populace. So the people of Zaire had strong negative feelings towards German shepherds specifically, understandably, because they were used to oppress them. And that sealed the deal. Just that. Like, there's nothing wrong with German shepherds as a species of dog. No, having dogs is relatable, man's best friend, all that symbolism, except in that specific area, in that specific context, where George Foreman didn't know beforehand. He didn't show up early, and he didn't scout. He didn't come prepared. He just assumed people were going to be rooting for him, while Muhammad Ali did the legwork. And he got lucky on top of that, of course, because George Foreman kind of sealed the deal with the shepherds, with the German shepherds. But still.
So there you have it. Definitely a lot of insight to glean from that, particularly in the ways that cultures perceive things that we might not even consider, in the course of planning or executing. There was definitely a lot more to be found in that episode, so I'd highly recommend checking it out if you have a chance. Next up on our list is an item specifically from our friend Chevy Ray of Happy Ray Games, the developer of Eichenfell, an excellent RPG that launched last year. We're going to be taking a look at some particular advice around collaboration. We had actually done a part 1 to the future planning topic, just Andrew and myself, but this particular interview allowed us to delve into that specifically with someone who had a lot of collaborators involved in his project. So I sincerely hope you enjoy this clip, and I'll go ahead and play that for you right now. Sorts of additional systems and things like that.
Exactly.
So I think is to kind of really put that emphasis on it from a future planning point of view. The key isn't necessarily, it's not about cutting corners. It's more about finding creative and productive solutions to kind of still create something meaningful and good while also not necessarily creating something massively out of scope and forcing yourself into development hell.
Yeah, you're not cutting corners. You're just, instead of building a new house, you're painting the interior of the one you already live in.
Yeah. Great analogy and way of putting it.
Yes. Very apt. So to kind of talk about some of the additional steps, when did you start considering kind of the collaborators for this game, like the relationship with Humble and then some of the composers and vocalists, and what did kind of your process in starting those relationships look like?
Cool. Yeah, so once I had known what I was doing, that it was a party-based game, it was about a group of people where not no one was really the main character. Everyone had a lot of attention and time, and also had kind of a storyline and a relationships with each other that had to culminate in a way that really mattered. I was looking through musicians and I knew I really wanted to do a musical game. I'm making an RPG. I can't make bad music. I played Chrono Trigger, Mario RPG. I've played all the modern RPGs. Like music is one of the most important things always. They spend huge amounts of work and money and time on their soundtracks. And I was like, well, I have to have a really good soundtrack, so I jumped around a bunch. And then I reached out to the creators of Steven Universe because I knew that they were really into games a lot and they liked games. And I thought, so I kind of cold emailed them and said, hey, I'm working on a game and it's RPG and it's about a bunch of characters. And I think you two would be a really good fit for doing the music for the game because, and I would like to email you with a pitch and also explain more why I think that you two would fit really well. Sarashu just responded, yeah, sure, send us email. Here's my email. So I cold emailed them with, well, not cold emailed, I emailed with a follow up to that with a whole picture of the game, screenshots, all the characters, what it was all about, and said, well, with your work on Steven Universe, the music played a big role in the growth of the characters. Their music, when a character, evolves or overcomes something, their music changes. When two characters are having a thing, the songs are like a combination of them. And when the characters literally combine, the songs combine with them, the instruments combine. They also worked with a lot of collaborators and they also worked with real instruments. And that's both things I really, really wanted. I wanted vocals and instruments. I can tell it's very retro looking, but I wasn't intending to create a retro game. I know it's visually very retro and it also is inspired by some older games like, Earthbound and Pokemon and Fire Emblem. But it's very much modern in so many ways. And once you look at the sound and the music and the writing's very like naturalistic, stuff that wasn't in old games aren't really like that. And the puzzle design and the accessibility settings, there's way more about it that's modern than not. And I really wanted that sound. I really wanted music that was a bit retro, but also modern, that really matched up with the vision of the rest of the game. So retro music that's modern, very character driven, where the music plays a big role in the characters. Well, the composers for Steven Universe are almost the only people that fit all those criteria super well. And I was so lucky that they were actually on a hiatus from Steven Universe at the time, so they had a whole bunch of free time. At that time I emailed them, so they were just like, yeah, this sounds great. They've always wanted to work on a game. This sounded cool. I was a fairly well-known indie game developer, so they're like, all right, let's do it. So then we moved forward to the Kickstarter after that, and we spent a lot of time discussing who to bring in, what songs would be vocal, who we could collaborate with. And because they had spent so much time collaborating with musicians on Steven Universe, they knew the process. They knew about contracting someone to do winds. They knew how to contract a violinist. They knew several people that played all different instruments. They knew that process, so we didn't have to figure that out. We already knew how to do it, and they already had friends that did everything from like all over the States and Canada and all that. So yeah, it was like it worked out really well, and it was a good fit, and I got lucky with timing.
Nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's great that you had such a clear idea of like the kind of obvious like identity of your game and kind of the way that would mesh really well with their previous work. Because like as I was kind of getting through the story, I have to say like I was thinking like I couldn't imagine this with like any other set of composers. Like it's such a good fit.
Yeah, and
beep 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 boopy music,
right?
Like really, it just sort of drained the game.
Yeah, I mean, I do love my chip tune, but I mean, I agree. Like, and I'll be honest, I'm not that familiar with Eichenfeld, but I mean, just from you describing this, I'm like, what was I thinking? Not ever like playing this game now, because music is a big component for me when it comes to games and such. And then obviously your inspiration are things that I absolutely love too. But just how you said everything and described it, it's just like I don't see how people couldn't pick up the game after hearing that. To be quite frank. But in addition to that, I mean, a lot of what you were talking about was like there's a lot of moving parts in these collaborations, and then there's what?
So many.
Yeah, right. And there's so many other like forms of collaboration going on that you may not have been a part of just because they were so limited in a way where like you didn't necessarily need to be involved because you're involved in so many other things. So were there any challenges in the communication and just making sure that everybody was on the same page and aligned with your vision of the project? And if so, what did you do to kind of like manage those challenges?
One of the big reasons a lot of companies, even mid-sized indie game companies or AA companies, have producers or people who manage groups, directors. There's kind of different. Those roles actually are different depending on the size of companies. Like producers will often wear way more hats in smaller companies than they will in larger ones, stuff like that. But the reason those people manage, that's what they do. They spend all their time managing and making people work together and making sure everyone's getting what they need, is because that is a full-time job and it's a tremendous amount of work to make everyone happy. And the big challenge for me was I just was doing everything else and I just couldn't do that well enough. I wouldn't send an email to the music people for months sometimes because I was just crunching on some deadline, or they would. And another big one was Steven Universe picked up again, and they just were like, well, we got to do this because that's their job. And and so they just were gone.
All right, and that clip was from episode 144, which was our Future Planning Part 2 episode with Chevy Ray. That was honestly one of the better experiences I've had with an interview on this show. A lot of great insight and a deeper look into one of the better RPGs to come out last year. Now, this next clip is going to come from our episode 252, which is Going Full-Time Dev with Thomas Brush. This discussion actually veers into some pretty intimidating territory, but something I think is all too important for devs to consider. The process by which we come into that full-time world where we're able to hang up the 9 to 5 and go all in on the game development isn't something that's going to look the same for everyone. And I think the journey to accepting that is a big part of allowing devs to access their full potential. This next bit of advice really goes into detail on that, and I think you'll find it to be quite helpful.
Daunting to most people. So, what's a good way to approach this so that the concept is less frightening but easier to visualize?
Well, here's a good metaphor. If you were to go to Vegas and gamble away some money, let's say you're going to go out with your buddies. The way you approach that is you go, okay, how much money can I throw away? How much money can I just burn? You don't go to Vegas going, okay, I've got $5,000 in savings. That's all I've got. I'm going to go spend it and make some money. Like, that's a terrible way to do this. The way you should gamble away your money, if you're going to gamble, is to say, well, I could lose $1,000. I've got maybe you got $10,000 in savings. I'm going to lose $1,000. And if I lose it, that's okay. The same needs to be true with how you start your game studio. And I don't know if this frustrates people or it's an overly simplistic way of thinking about it, but you should never jump into a venture as risky as game development, which especially like solo or indie game development is a very risky venture. So you should never jump into it saying, this is going to be my career. I'm going to make $1 million. It's always going to pay off. You need to be willing to not only lose money, and by money, I mean, I guess your time, or maybe you spend a couple grand on getting some help or whatever. But yeah, you need to be willing to lose money and you need to be willing to lose time and basically sacrifice it on the altar of, well, maybe it was your childhood dream, and say, I'm going to go for it.
Yeah.
So I mentor some people, and I always tell them that. They're like, okay, when is it going to pay off? When is it going to pay off? And I just say, I don't know. So ultimately, my piece of advice is, if you're not willing to lose some money, if you're not willing to lose some of your time, maybe that's your, Netflix and chill time.
Yep.
If you're not willing to lose that, you shouldn't be doing it, because I can't promise you're going to go full time. I can tell you what I did to go full time, and what some very, very clear cut, tried and true tactics you can do. So the idea of going full time, it is daunting. And I've had people tell me, how do I get over the fear? How do I get over the fear? And I'm like, you're not really going to get over the fear.
Yeah.
Until you start making some money. So if you're not a person who can't, I guess, walk into a dark room and just all you're thinking about is turning on the light, well, maybe this isn't for you. You've got to be okay with that feeling of, I don't know if this is going to pay off. I can't see my future. I have no idea what this is. And that's okay. And you learn to breathe, and you learn to be okay with the process. So that's the best. So from a mental approach, to answer your question, from a mental approach, the way to become less frightened is to just, here's a metaphor, touch the tarantula, hold the tarantula, let it crawl all over your face, and learn to deal with it. Because there's nothing else there's no other better advice I think I can give. Because the rest of them would just be kind of almost like washed down, artsy fartsy. What's the word, like what gurus typically say, which is you can get all this money and you can make all this money. It's like, no, I'm going to teach you how to be fearless. That's what I'm going to teach you how to do first.
Yeah. And I very valid point.
All right, and there you have it, folks. So, as mentioned, that is episode 252, Going Full-Time Dev with Thomas Brush, focused on that transition to becoming a full-time developer. It's a scary thing, and it certainly demands a lot of you to even start exploring that as an option. So I love the way he focuses on the strategic element of that and really taking time to plan and consider your options. Now, the next clip that I'm going to play for you is from episode 260, a more recent one back in September, How to Gamify Your Marketing Using Different Assets with Sean French. Now, this one is very interesting. It kind of talks about ways to manage a sort of cross-promotional branding piece for your game, leveraging assets that are not just the game itself, while still managing that balance. And I think, as this clip will show you, there are a lot of ways to potentially slip up and fall short when doing that. So Sean shows us a more delicate approach that allows you to maintain the balance of your project.
A single entity experience that provides, great value, and then also has the ability to cross promote, not leading with the cross promotion now.
Yes, because when you lead with cross promotion, you alienate anybody who doesn't care about the game.
Right.
That's really the thing.
Or vice versa.
Enough, yes, exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, we were low enough risk that we didn't have to face a tremendous amount of pressure.
Yep.
We were coming out with through a comic imprint that's already successful. It has a fan base. There are people who buy all the Black Caravan books. So we were in a situation where, I knew we were going to succeed to some degree. It was just a question of, maybe we come up $1,000 short, maybe we make a few thousand on it, but it wasn't going to be a big amount of money one way or another.
Yep.
So we didn't have to compromise the quality of the comic to try and extract every bit of promotional value out of it. That was never our approach.
Yeah. No, and yeah, definitely a good one to go, because again, it goes back to the whole intent and value aspect.
Right.
So, I obviously at the beginning of this project and everything, the game was the main focus, and obviously, as you shared with us already, the game and the comic had to be treated as separate projects. And I was just curious because, again, I'm trying to be speak to anybody who's looking to possibly do something like this in the future or whatever, what type of resources were devoted to each project? And did they have like separate marketing plans, campaigns, and things like that?
Yeah, Hyperkinetic gave me free reign to basically assemble a team and basically make the comic as a side project. They provided valuable feedback on the script and concept art and a budget, obviously, which helps. But the creative decisions, were mine to make. For better or worse, this is always going to be my baby, and I knew that going in. And that leads to a tremendous amount of self-applied pressure, to reward their trust and make a great comic, which, fortunately now we've done. And man, we got this sent off to press yesterday, and I could not love this issue more. It is just top to bottom the highest quality execution that has ever existed of one of my stories. It's just I'm madly in love with it. I can't wait till we can share it with everyone. So what we did is I basically, we didn't want to take any studio resources because we didn't want to slow down development of the game on anything. So I just kind of built everything on the side and kind of put together a team of people that either I've worked with before or I knew through the comic book world. The first one was Steve Mardo, who's our main artist, and he's phenomenal. I mean, if you look up Tales from the FCU, just Google it, look up some of the images there. His artwork is just amazing, and his character designs are so good, which is super important for a fantasy story. And Steve had somehow never really landed a book that could fully showcase his talents. So this is kind of a win-win for him. He'd been looking for a good opportunity that had some real meat to sink his teeth into, and and Black Caravan's publisher Joe Schmalke had raved about Martin to me. He said, "This guy's great. You should really look at him." And he kind of put him on my radar, and that's become the best partnership ever. I mean, Mardo and I are like brothers now. And then the next big piece of the puzzle was coloring. And for that, we got Steve Levine, who did the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. So, 10-year-old me, in retrospect, is geeking out in the background with the knowledge that I'm working with the Turtles guy. So Steve colored the original series, but he also did most of the early merchandising artwork, so that when people picture the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the image they're usually conjuring up is like what was on the lunchboxes and T-shirts and that sort of stuff, and that was all Levine. He did almost all that stuff. So bringing on someone who is just this master of color and has this just wonderful, vibrant style to kind of bring this to life was that was the best call. It just took everything to a whole new level. So basically, everyone but me at Hyperkinetic just continued on with business as usual while I put this thing together on the side.
Nice. And you were the writer for the game anyways, correct? Or one of the...
Yes.
Okay. So a few things I want to call out here that I think are great one is first off, you said we didn't want to take resources from the main project, which was definitely the game. I mean, yes, you had a budget allocated for the comic and everything, but for the game. And then and I think that's important because clearly at the end of the day, the focus is still the development of the game.
And it's important that the players and readers know that too. That they don't think that we have taken our attention off from getting out of early access while we're getting distracted by making comics and other stuff,
Right. Exact. And thank you for clarifying that because we see it all the time, folks, when whether it's life that happens or anything else with the production of a game and people don't hear from you right away, then they start wondering. So again, even in our last episode with Bruno, he mentioned simply how, hey, just let people know that stuff's still going on, even if you're busy or whatever, even if doesn't seem like much that they would care about, let them know. And so I love that you provided that distinction too, because it carries through with everything. It's like, hey, because if you're giving the signals that are like, hey, we're making a comic now, and then you don't hear anything, type stuff, like, well, now they're like, oh, now they're making comic books. And if you're a studio making...
You could totally trigger backlash, among fans that have been waiting to get out of early access, and yeah.
And I think
that's a real concern.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to look at, like, don't look at resources just from the terms of like time and money. Look at it also in the forms of transparency and communication.
Absolutely appreciate how concise Andrew was in summing up what Sean had said. I mean, it really does come down to valuing your assets, but also making sure that you're transparent with the people who are already invested in your product. No need to alienate people who are already interested. Now, for our final clip of the day, we're going to go back to our interview in February with Greg Kasavin from Supergiant Games. We discussed a lot about the development process for Hades, Bastion, Transistor, but one piece of advice I think rang truer than anything else we covered in that discussion, and it was the value of feedback, but not just feedback itself, specifically well-curated, meaningful feedback targeted towards the people receiving it. But I think the way Greg sums it up is better than anything I could offer here. So here comes the clip. And kind of for the benefit of our listeners, can you elaborate a little bit on that? Like primarily, what does, I guess, kind of the proper execution of that skill typically look like, at least in your experience?
Yeah, it's it's a good question. I think that giving feedback effectively, I think above all requires having context, and that context can be as far-reaching as possible, really. But two really important aspects of it are one is what stage of development is the game in? Like where is it at? What are the constraints? Is it very early? Is this like concept level feedback, or is the game, weeks away from shipping? Like if the game is weeks away from shipping, if you want to utterly destroy, a developer to whom you're giving feedback, then like, you could be critical of it on like a foundational conceptual level of like, I don't know that this whole game concept is a good idea. It's like that is just going to, maybe that's what the developer needs to hear, but this is the other part of it, right? Like it's valuable to know to whom, like who you are addressing with the feedback. The more that you can know about them, the more you can, like, the more effectively you can communicate with them, because you don't, you can, the way you may communicate with your close friend is different than the way you may communicate with like with like someone at a different studio who you've never met before, right? Like we adjust our communication naturally. And the more you know the person, the more you can adjust your communication to to use language that is going to get through to that person. Like if you know the person well, you can communicate with them more effectively in many cases, just kind of broadly. So I think just knowing, so a really simple question I ask sometimes when other developers ask me for feedback is like, what stage of, like, where are you at in development? What type of feedback are you looking for? And that can cause them to be more introspective about, like, hey, we're 3 weeks away from shipping. The game is just about done. We're looking for, but having said that, any feedback right now is welcome, because we're going to hear about it in reviews. But then if there's any small stuff that, that you found distracting or whatever, that's the kind of stuff we would really want to know about. Blah blah. That just knowing that type of information up front can help. And then I think the other thing is, I always like to speak to the promise of a game, what it was doing, how it was working for me, what was going well about it, and then what parts of it, maybe didn't fit with the rest of that experience. So I think framing it in a constructive way, not like blowing smoke or anything, right? But just like coming at it from the perspective that things can always be better, and there's always a good idea, or not always, right? But there's very frequently a good idea at the heart of something that's just sort of trying to break free. Yeah, so that's a long-winded answer, but the short summary, like I said, is just trying not to give feedback blind and trying to be mindful of the stage of development the game is in and the people who will be receiving the feedback and sort of communicating with them accordingly in terms that will be constructive, because your goal as a feedback giver is to be constructive and to help to try to provide helpful feedback. Oh, one last thing I want to add is, I think we ask for this explicitly. Hades was developed in early access. We welcomed all sorts of feedback, but we said the feedback that we value the most is the player's personal experience. Like, when in doubt, just describe your experience. Say how you felt. Say what confused you. Say what you enjoyed. Say what you didn't enjoy. You don't need to speculate about what will other people do. You don't need to say, like, oh, I got what you were going for, but I'm worried that other people, may not understand this. I'm an experienced game player, so this wasn't difficult for me, but I worry it might be difficult for other people. Like, don't worry about that. Just say your own experience, because a developer should be gathering feedback from many different types of people, and if the game is too hard for certain types of people, they'll hear from those people. Like, you're not responsible to give feedback on behalf of people who are not yourself. So, but I find that often, like, there's a temptation to make to generalize beyond one's personal experience when giving feedback, and I find that type of feedback can while well intentioned, often can be misleading, I think.
All right, and that was a collection of just 5 short clips, some of the best pieces of advice we feel were shared on the show by our amazing guests this year. That last one, again, just for your reference, was from episode 145, How to Consistently Maintain Quality with Supergiant Games. I just wanted to thank you for listening into this New Year's special. Again, a different approach to what we typically do, but just to accommodate during our hiatus, we wanted to make sure there was something that you could still glean from us towards the end of the year. Again, we couldn't have done this without you. It's been an incredible set of episodes, some of the best that we've had so far, and we look forward to bringing new content to you soon. Again, thank you all for listening. Have a happy holiday.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustapha Price. If you enjoy and value the show's content, you can support us even more by going to Patreon and visiting www.patreon.com/IGM podcast and select the tier that best suits your needs. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.